a story I created called The Cafe and the Stage. This is where a well-trained singer who is still developing their career works at a cafe as a waiter. The waiter is struggling with their voice, so they go for an appointment with a vocal specialist. The waiter complains about their voice feeling stuck, and they have significantly reduced high notes when they sing. They're warming up before the show and singing with proper technique during the show, so they can't understand what is happening. The vocal specialist asks, well, what do you do for work? I work in a cafe. The immediate follow-up question from the vocal professional is, well, what do you do to protect your voice at work? And the person replies, well, what do you mean? Why would I need to do anything to protect my voice at work?
What?
I'm Tessa Livingston, and I'm very honoured to be here with you today. As Evan said, I am a voiceover artist, vocal coach, a voice agent from New Zealand with Big Mouth Voices, and a tutor at the Voice Academy. So yes, good morning. All right, so what we're going to do today is I'm going to give you a rundown on the principles of vocal management, consistency, and awareness, because I feel that they are key components when it comes to making a strong performer. But not just a strong performer, a strong vocal performer, because we're voiceover artists. We want to be putting these two things together. So today we're going to be looking at these three principles: management, consistency, and awareness, relating it to voice. Often when we have a webinar with a vocal coach, I know that lots of people want exercises, what's going to make my voice sound best, what vocal health tip is going to make my voice last longer, what's the quickest way to learn an accent or learn projection or resonance, articulation changes, anything. But these questions can often be hard to answer because the answer is normally, well, it depends on so many different things. So asking these questions is one way to look at working with the voice, and it is very, very valid. But today I want to go just a little bit deeper than that. Rather than how do I make my voice sound better, let's go with how to move into working on your voice with the aid of exercises. How do we look at it in a bigger way? To understand the effects of your voice with vocal health, how do we look at those things pairing together rather than just looking for the quick tips? We're looking at the bigger picture of vocal practice. So to care for your voice long term and give yourself vocal agency, making good decisions for yourself and your voice. Because this is often what happens with quick vocal tips and exercises when we don't have the foundation underneath them to support the information. You're given a vocal exercise in the moment and it works. And of course it does, because it's a vocal exercise and they're great and they're fantastic. But what happens when the person who gave it to you is no longer there to direct you on how to do it? Will you know why you're doing what you're doing? What happens when you apply it somewhere new? Will you know how to apply it somewhere new or at different levels and different intensities? There are so many ways to understand vocal exercises, which is why I want to talk about the way that we're talking about it today. We're going to look at vocal practice in a more holistic way for practices that support the long game, because that's what we are all here for, right? If anyone tells you that voiceover is a short game, they might have been telling you just a wee fib.
Yeah.
Just a little one, right? But we do need to acknowledge that for some people it has been a short game. So, and those people are extremely valid as well. There's that 1 in a million, right, where it just all sort of happened and clicked together.
Fast, yeah.
So we're going to discuss these principles. Knowing this stuff and knowing how to apply it will make you a more hireable VO. And that's what everybody wants. Everybody wants to be more hireable. So we've done part 1, a little bit about me and a wee introduction of what we're talking about today. We're going to define the 3 principles of vocal mastery. So this is vocal management, consistency, and awareness. We don't have time to cover all 3 today in depth, so we're just going to be focusing on vocal management. We're going to do just a little bit of vocal anatomy, because I think it's really important to understand what you're trying to protect and what you're trying to look after. And then we will actually talk on the topic of vocal management. So let's get into it. All right, so let's define consistency. In today's context, we're talking about vocal training. So you get what you practice. Whatever you are consistent in is what you become competent in. Now, this can be in any facet of life. It is not just specific to voice and voiceover, so it is worth talking about. Whatever performance or vocal habits you practice are the ones you're going to keep, preferable and non-preferable. If you think about how much you use your natural speaking voice in your everyday life with its rhythms and its habits and its little quirks, those things are going to be so deeply ingrained that it's going to be difficult to shift them. So we use consistency to form new habits, but we also use consistency to break old habits. So they can be things like always reading with the same cadence every single time you pick up a script. Or it can be dropping out to vocal fry at the end of a sentence. This is something that lots of people do, and it's a really big habit. Always inflecting up or always inflecting down at the ends of sentences, which is very common in New Zealand. Our natural speaking pattern is to inflect up, and everybody thinks that we're asking questions. So that's a habit New Zealanders have to break. Or always using the same projection level on scripts when they potentially require a different one. So there are lots of things that we can look at with consistency, and it's exactly that. You get what you practice.
As a coach, you're trying to help students avoid some of these things where they don't realize that they're getting bad at the wrong thing.
Yeah, I suppose so. Like, a lot of it is about awareness. We're not necessarily looking to take away bad habits or good habits. We're just looking to see what's more appropriate in the moment, because everything has its place and has its value. Glottal fry, for example, that's really like LA and that sort of sound, has really, really good function in certain places. It's actually a really good vocal warm-up. Some characters speak with vocal fry. That is a lovely relaxation exercise for your vocal cords. So sitting and letting that sort of bubble away is really good. So we're trying to shift habits to have more awareness around why we would be using them or not using them in certain circumstances. Awareness is one's ability to observe their self and their surroundings and make choices and adjustments accordingly. So internal and external awareness of your voice and your vocal behaviors is a tricky skill to hone, but once you've got it, it's an absolute game changer to help you with vocal analysis as well as performance analysis. It kind of allows you to step outside of yourself and not think, how good was I? But look at the different components objectively and go, well, what did I do that made that good? Or what did I do that made me like it less? It's a really good skill to develop because it just continues to develop over time the more you get into it. Awareness is important because without it, we can tend to get stuck. And that's really, really frustrating. I'm sure a number of you have experienced being stuck in your vocal or voiceover practice and not being sure why that is. And this is where awareness comes in really heavily. It's really helpful. Great. Now, on to topic of the day, which is management. This is the way we manage our voice and the capacity of our voice in different situations. Not understanding that non-performance spaces and performance spaces need to be treated the same with varying degrees of vocal strategies or use is what this boils down to. More plainly, not knowing how the voice works or having the understanding that it needs to be managed differently in different environments with the same foundational principles. So it doesn't matter what you're doing, your voice needs to be managed in some form or way. So I can give you an example of this. A story I created called The Cafe and the Stage. Sounds quite dramatic, but here is the scenario. This is where a well-trained singer who is still developing their career works at a cafe as a waiter. A scenario we can all relate to in some form or way, having your day job and then having your passions that you love doing at the other end of the day. The waiter is struggling with their voice, so they go for an appointment with a vocal specialist. The waiter complains about their voice feeling stuck, and they have significantly reduced high notes when they sing. They're warming up before the show and singing with proper technique during the show, so they can't understand what is happening. The vocal specialist asks, well, what do you do for work? They say, well, I work in a cafe. The immediate follow-up question from the vocal professional is, well, what do you do to protect your voice at work? And the person replies, well, what do you mean? Why would I need to do anything to protect my voice at work? End of story.
Yeah.
So this is a huge problem. And this is where management features really, really heavily, because this is a problem that I have dealt with many, many times. And in fact, it was a core part of my caseload when I was working as a speech pathologist, because so many of us are so used to our speaking voice just working in certain environments, so like your home life, your work life, your social life, that we pay no thought or management to it in those environments, when in fact it can have a huge impact on the effectiveness of our voice in those performance spaces that we care about so much, those ones that are so absolutely special to us. So this is where management is really important, because often it's paying attention to the things we don't pay attention to manage ourselves better. Knowing how to manage your voice in different environments based on your vocal capacity, and your capacity meaning what your voice can handle and not what you think it can handle or what you observe other people's voices handling. There is a very, very big distinction there. And management is all about keeping your voice safe for the long term, which is really important when it comes to like vocal health and just being a really professional vocal performer and voiceover artist. We're going to have a little pause on management because I promised that we'd do a little bit of anatomy, an odd promise to make, but I promised we'd do a little bit of anatomy. So here we go. Anatomy, what is the purpose of going over this? Well, understanding what we are trying to manage, keep consistent, and be aware of. If we're not aware of what the anatomy actually is, what's the point in doing all of this extra stuff to make sure that it functions properly? We need to look at anatomy because people often think that when we're doing voice that we're managing a sound that we hear, and this is a correct way to look at it, but I don't feel it is the most correct way of looking at it or the most beneficial long term. What we hear is based off of the way that we put our muscles together to produce a sound. So if you are waiting to manage your voice based off of a sound you hear, you might be a little bit late. So we want to look at it from a different perspective, understanding what we're doing with our muscles first before we deal to the sound. When we're looking at anatomy, this is why it's really important. Your voice is created in your body, not inside your ears. Manage the muscles before the sound, and then you can play with the sound later. Understanding how things feel and how you manipulate them at their earlier stages is far more beneficial long-term than waiting to hear it. Let's have a look at those muscles. So this is your laryngeal anatomy, often called your voice box or your larynx. So this is this lovely little bit that sits in the middle of your throat here. If you take your 4 fingers and just place them on the front of your throat gently and swallow, you should feel a bumpy bit move up and down. That's your voice box. That's where all of this, these tiny, tiny muscles live. So what we're looking at today are just these thin 2 strips that look like this. Just to give you some idea of what this, how this picture is orientated. So this is the front of the throat. So this is this portion here, and this bit here is the back, and this is the base of your tongue. Imagine if you've just been sliced off at the neck and you're looking down this way. This is how we're looking at the image. So we're just looking at these tiny, tiny little bits. So just to give you some understanding of them, they are 17 to 24 millimeters long for men. And for women, they are between 12 and 19 millimeters long. So they are very, very little, and they are 3 to 5 mil thick. So if you imagine your pinky fingernail, potentially the length of it and only a third of how wide it is. So we're expecting our voices to do these really, really big activities based on these 2 tiny strips of muscular function, which is insane. It would be like expecting your pinky finger to pick up 10 kgs without using any other muscles associated with your arm, with your back, and with your shoulders. And we really don't want to be doing that because the vocal folds are very, I can't think of the word for them. I often refer to them as a toddler, that if something starts to go wrong, they just start to tantrum and they don't like things. So we need to look after them really, really well. Here's just a more anatomical view of them, so you know what they actually look like inside your body. So just these little white strips. This is your windpipe coming down this way. And then this is actually your epiglottis, which is that fun thing that flops over all of the space so that you don't inhale, like food and liquid. It's a very, very helpful part of the body. We expect them to do a lot of work, and we need to manage them properly because otherwise they might experience things like swelling or pitch reduction. You might experience some pain when voicing, potentially some breathlessness. You might then experience limited time working, which is no fun for anybody. And that can be for your non-performance spaces and your performance spaces. And then that can sometimes cause you to have low confidence with your voice as well, which isn't very helpful. So vocal management 101. How much voice money can you spend during the day? So throughout this, I'd like you to think about your voice like a bank. And we'll use this analogy throughout because I just think it's really helpful to get a hold of what voice is really like. So let's say on average, the average person has $100 of voice to use per day. Say maybe a vocally fit individual might have $200 of voice usage per day, and someone starting on their journey might, have somewhere between 50 or 75. So everybody can have different amounts of money based on their individual vocal capacity and awareness of their voice. It is very important to know that certain voicing activities cost more than others. And you can also go into overdraft as well. This is what happens potentially when you've used your voice too much or you've spent too much of your money, like everybody has experienced going into overdraft, and you have to wait a little bit longer until you've saved up some money to use your voice again. So this is how we're talking about it today. So we sort of split it into two categories when we're talking about it. We have our voice bank, we have vocal load, what you are spending, and then we have vocal resets, how you can increase your income in the moment when you're using your voice. So how we're spending our money, vocal load, how are you spending your voice money? What we're looking at is your physical effort with your voice. What are you loading your voice up with during the day? Now, vocal load is used, if we're using it in official terms, this is measured with the parameters of intensity, duration, and pitch. For today, we're just going to be focusing on intensity and duration because pitch kind of adds another technical field to it that we don't have time to cover today. But intensity and duration, we absolutely do. So continuing to use the money analogy, knowing what each vocal activity is going to cost, because this is going to reduce your risk of hurting your voice over time. So let's have a look at my lovely little stick graph that I have produced over here. So let's have a look at some different categories as well. So regular talking. For majority of people, regular talking is quite a vocally low intense activity, right? So if it's quite low intensity, it means that we can probably do it for quite a long time. And that's fantastic. So this is how we're measuring this. Let's have a look at, say, maybe like efforts, which I love the term efforts for vocal usage because it just so aptly describes what it is. It is an effort to do vocal efforts. So this has a higher vocal intensity. So maybe it'll sit here and maybe we can only do it for, say, if this is 6 hours, maybe this is only 30 minutes that we can do these vocal activities for. What we can also think of is that maybe if we are using these intensities in different ways, maybe we might extend past this and go into vocal overdraft. Let's take a night out, pub. These things are all quite vocally intense because of all of the surrounding factors that are around it. One, we've probably had a couple of drinks, so we're a little bit more free with our voice than we typically are, or the way that we manage it. We might be in an environment that's quite loud, so we're trying to use our voice in a bigger way. And we're also in a social environment, so we're using our voice more than we typically would. Let's say it sits about here. Well, maybe we've only got 30 to 45 minutes of this sort of activity before we start to experience some difficulties with our voice. But because we've decided to continue going, we're going to push past this line and maybe we're going to do it for a few hours. And then our voice really starts struggling. So in this space up here, we might experience our voice starting to fatigue. We might experience us trying to force our voice even further to keep it going. You might start to experience some swelling. I'm sure we've all had this sound the next day. This is vocal swelling, when the voice isn't quite connecting and it has that lower, deeper sound. And it might take a few days or a few hours for your voice to come right, depending on who you are and what happened with your voice throughout that time. So this is how we look at vocal management. We assess what the activity is, how long we can do it, and then base the rest of our day on this. But it is all dependent on your vocal capacity and your vocal awareness. Let's just say, for example, that regular talking typically is down here. We can do it for a number of hours throughout the day. But let's say, for example, a person has a higher amount of glottal fry in their voice when they naturally talk. What's going to happen here is that this changes the vocal intensity from somewhere here, maybe to somewhere here. Because even though glottal fry is okay in little bursts and bits throughout your natural speaking voice, like if you're really tired, it's totally okay to use glottal fry. If you're using it as a warm-up, if you're using it as a character description, those are all totally fine. But if it's in your everyday speaking voice and say, this person here has gone out to a cafe and they're going to be there for 3 hours, they can probably talk the whole time. A person with glottal fry constantly in their voice, which means it limits their pitch range, it limits their projection and their volume capacity, maybe that exercise or going to the cafe for 3 hours is going to be much more vocally intense, but they're still going to be there for 3 hours. So that's when we start going into this zone where things get really difficult. Same with booking a gaming gig. Say It's totally fine. You're really excited. You've booked this amazing acting gig for gaming, and then there's screaming and efforts that have to be done at the end. Well, if you're not aware of how to do those, or you don't have the capacity to do them, you might have very, very minimal time of being able to do them before the voice gives out. So this is really important because no one person is the same on their capacity, and we need to look after this. That is why we talk about vocal load. What are you loading your voice with? Knowing what voicing activity you're doing and how long you can do it for safely. Everybody is different, and you really have to be aware of these things, because it can also include things like vocal load might also include the fact that you didn't sleep very well last night. So your vocal loading capacity comes down because you are physically tired. And if you are physically tired, so will your voice. But if we don't have lots of management strategies around it, we need to change how we use our voice throughout the day. So let's move on to the solution, because it's not all doom and gloom. We can use something called vocal resets. Vocal resets can help you earn back some of the money that you have spent on the voicing activity to allow you to continue doing the voicing activity for longer. Here we have our parameters of duration, so time spent doing the activity, and vocal compression over time, strain over time. So this is naturally going to happen because it's a part of the body. It's a muscle. It is going to wear out at some point, and compression and strain are the places that it tends to go first. So after our warm-up, our voice is feeling nice and free, nice and open. And as we continue to do our activity over time, let's say we're reading an audiobook, we've got this time moving. And then we have vocal compression over time. Naturally, the voice is going to start to strain. We're going to start heading towards things like fatigue, strain, pushing, which can then equate to forced rest. Maybe you're not going to be able to give the best performance that you'd like to be able to give because you're thinking about the fact that your voice is starting to get tired and sore. And that might mean the end of your workday, which nobody really wants. And by using vocal resets, we are able to achieve this. A vocal reset helps place all of the muscles inside your voice, inside your larynx or your voice box, back to their optimal so that you can continue to use them for longer. So here's what we do. We have our warm-up first thing in the morning or before your activity that you're going to be doing. And then you start doing your activity. Vocal compression starts to happen over time. And then we pop in a vocal reset. That means that we're able to put our voice back to its original form, or as close to its original form as possible, because we have been using it. It is a muscle. It is always going to need rest at some point. And then we can do it again throughout our day. This increases our vocal trust, which is huge. It increases our performance capacity, and we can continue with our workday. What are vocal resets? These can include anything that you use in your vocal warm-up to start your day. So these can include SOVTs, body shaking. Sometimes vocal resets don't always have to be hyper vocally focused. They can be holistically focused. So these can be grounding exercises as well. You can use glottal fry, hydration options. Sometimes using a bit of steam in between can help lower the larynx and give everything a bit of space and keep you breathing. Or you can use naps and rests. These are really fantastic. If you're doing an hour's worth of voicing, maybe you should just have a 2-minute nap at the end of it, not talking for 2 minutes. Vocal management is so much more than just understanding the nerdy points of, well, this is how my vocal folds move, and this is what these do, and this is this. It's going, well, actually, how do I be a more hireable voiceover artist? How do I be a more professional voiceover artist? Because I know how to maintain and manage my voice throughout a workday. Sometimes working on the agent side of voiceover, sometimes I know that I'll pop out an audition for people, and I always say, especially if it's for gaming, and I'll go, there are efforts and screams during this vocal session that might go for 4 hours. If you don't feel your vocal capacity is up to it, please don't audition. And then some people still do because they don't know what that means. They book the gig and then they struggle in the session, and then they've left a bad taste in the mouth of the casting director or the, whoever has hired them, because they go, oh, well, we made it clear that you shouldn't audition for this if you can't complete the brief. So this is why this is really important. You need to know how to manage. You've got to be aware and be able to keep it consistent all in one go. And not only that, you have to be able to act at the same time. So this is why we talk about this and we think about this, because these two things for a voiceover artist have to be really well married together. Often people do just want to work on the acting component, and that's totally fine. For your starting out voiceover artist, yeah, I would say go get some acting training, because it doesn't matter how good your voice sounds. If you can't portray the script in the manner that it needs to be portrayed, doesn't matter, right? But don't forget about this component, because this is what takes a good voice actor to a great voice actor. So that sort of wraps up my formal portion of the slides, but I would like to share a quick story with you, because it's all good and well being like, well, yes, this is what you should do and this is what you should practice. But you also have to example that, right? So I, like everybody, had a really bad day one day. I was having a terrible day, and everybody knows that, like, that Kim Kardashian, like, bad, ugly crying meme. Has everybody seen that before? Yeah, I had one of those days. So that was really fun. And I knew that as it was happening, I had all of this tension developing in my throat and in my neck. And I had 2 voiceover gigs the next day, both booked into studios. And one of them was for an hour and a half, and then the second one was for an hour, and there was an hour of gap in between. And after all of that had happened, I could feel all of that tension in my throat. I could feel it in my jaw. I was really tired. I was like, right, I'll go to bed. I know that just having a rest is going to alleviate some of that muscular contraction that I've got going on. I'll go lie down, I'll go to sleep, and I'll be fine when I wake up in the morning. I was not fine. I don't know what had happened, but I had overstressed them just a little bit too much, and they had retained some of their tension overnight. So what ended up happening is that during my sessions, I warmed up to my highest capacity, to as far as my breath capacity would go, getting my jaw nice and wide, my throat nice and relaxed, and making sure that I had the right resonant placements for the types of voiceovers I was going to be doing. And they happened to be commercial for this particular day. So, we needed a little bit of nasal resonance, lots of little balances of voice things going on. And I got there and I was like, oh, actually, I'm feeling really warm. I did my warm-ups in the car, feeling good. Got in there, and then I started talking to the people. And as I was just naturally talking to them, I could feel my voice starting to deteriorate. I was like, no. So my vocal capacity today is extremely limited. So what I did, as I got into the booth, I jumped on my straws. So I'm a really big SOVT user. So these sorts of things. I jumped on my straws really quickly. And between each of my takes, I was resetting my voice, making sure that it could keep the same capacity. And it was absolutely exhausting. But if I hadn't have done that, I would have lost both of those jobs, because my voice was deteriorating on the spot. I was losing chord connection, I was losing resonance, I was losing breath capacity, all kinds of things. So I had to be really, really on my management strategies to make sure that I could continue to use my voice in between. After that first job, I went home, I did steams, I rested, I didn't talk to anybody, no talking to anybody. And then I did my next session and I had to do the same thing. So this is why management is great to know about, because this happens to everybody. Everybody has a bad day from time to time. Everybody has stressful home environments. Everybody has stressful work environments. And knowing how to manage your voice throughout these things means that you get to keep doing the things that you love. So that's my story on vocal management. So if you do want to get in contact with me, you can follow me on Instagram or TikTok. The handle is the same for both of them. I have my website and my email address, and I do have some courses available at the moment. So I have a discount for voices, which is 15% on the Actor's Voice course that I run. It's a 1-month training course for breath and vocal stamina, which covers management, vocal health, projection, how to sustain your voice over long periods of time. And you can also contact me at Big Mouth Voices here in New Zealand.
I encourage you all to go find Tessa on socials, of course, find her website, get one of the discounts on the course. I highly recommend you do that. Tessa, thanks so much for taking the time, for taking us through all of this. This is incredibly valuable information that can help transform careers, increase people's booking rates. And as voice actors, not everybody even takes the time to understand, the basics and the anatomy. So it's super important. So just thank you so much from all of us here. Of course, at Voices, we love working with you. Thanks so much, Tessa. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you on the next one.